So we just finished our bookshelf slash toy storage project here and then installed this sliding library ladder on it. And so I'm going to talk about which hardware set for the library ladder we went with, how we installed it, and what you should consider if you're installing your own. So a few years back, I worked for a college in the construction slash maintenance department, and we were renovating one of the old buildings on campus, and it happened to be the old library building. And so one day I went down and found like an old storage room in the basement that was just filled with old library ladders just sitting there in storage. And I thought these things were so cool, and I really wanted to track down and take home one of those library ladders that was just sitting there. Never did, but kind of made it a personal dream to someday install a library ladder in our house. And so that became the inspiration for this project here, where we put in a bookshelf and a toy storage area below that. And I thought this is the perfect project to install a library ladder on. So we just got around to building it now, but we started looking into it really about a year ago. And at the time, there were really few options out there for library ladder hardware available. And the ones that I was finding were pretty expensive. They were like in the $400, $500 range, or some of the really high-end ones were even like $1,000 or more. And so that wasn't going to fit our budget. So I started looking into DIY options and found some really good ones out there that you could just piece together with things you could find at a hardware store, and that was both affordable and doable. But fast forward to today, when we finally pulled the trigger on this project, I looked into what library ladder hardware options were available now and was really surprised to find there's actually a lot available now. And so after researching all the options that were out there, we ended up going with a brand that's called DIYHD. You can buy it on Amazon, and the hardware itself was only about $100, and so it was a really good value. Even if I was to go out and buy all the materials and stuff from the hardware store and kind of piece together my own hardware set for a library ladder, it was still probably going to be around that same price. So we'll link below to the exact hardware that we used here, but really my expectations of quality of it was pretty low, being that it was only $100. But I was actually pleasantly surprised with how high of quality it was. So the main components that you get are the top bar that the ladder actually glides across on, and then the rollers that attach to the bar, and then there's some wheels that attach on the bottom, and then you get all the hardware and everything else with it. I guess there's also these little stoppers for the end of the bar that stop it at either end when it's rolling. So like I said, everything has a really high quality feel to it. Like this top bar that the ladder attaches to is really solid, well built. I could probably do chin-ups on here if I wanted to. Both the top rollers and then the bottom wheels have ball bearings in them, so they glide super smooth. It's got a great feel to it. The finish itself was really nice. We went with like the dark bronze color finish. There's also like a gold or brass finish and then a silver finish as well. And there's also a ton of different length options of the top track that could fit really almost any application. I forget what the longest one was, but it was pretty long. Or they make connectors too, where you can just buy additional bar lengths and kind of build a custom size for whatever project you're doing. Another nice feature is that the bottom wheels have a lock, so you can lock the ladder in place, which is really nice and safe for, especially if you have kids that are going to be using the ladder. And then those wheels themselves, they're kind of like rollerblade wheels, but they're nice because they won't mark up your floors or anything like that. So installing the library ladder hardware is actually really simple. And just to walk you through the steps, so the first thing I did was to install this top track, which is 4 feet wide, and the brackets for that are spaced 2 feet apart. So I just measured and found the center of the bookshelf and then measured a foot in each direction, marked that, and then I just held the track up there with the mounting brackets on those marks, and I got a 4-foot level, put it on the bar, made sure that my track was nice and level, marked where my holes were going to be, and then I drilled a pilot hole and then just screwed in that top track with the screws that they provide. One of the things I didn't mention earlier is that in the kit they provide quite a few different screw options, which is nice. There's actually 3 different sizes of screws, and I found myself using all 3 of those while installing the library ladder. But for this top track, I used the longest screws, and put those in the brackets because I really wanted that top track to be mounted in there very securely. And then the next thing I did was brought my ladder over with those rollers that go on that top track, and then just held the ladder in place at the angle and position that I wanted to install it in with those rollers on the track, and then made some marks where the 4 screw holes would go for each of those rollers on each side of the ladder. Then I took the ladder back down, just drilled pilot holes where each of those hole marks were that I had marked out, and then again screwed in those rollers with the screws they had provided. I will mention that I installed our rollers on the inside of the ladder here. As you can see in the directions that they provide, they show it installed on the outside, but because there's these old pieces, this is like an antique wood ladder that was an extension ladder, and so it has these metal pieces on it on the outside, so I couldn't do that. We wanted to leave these in, and so we installed on the inside, and it seems to work fine. So then next I went down to the bottom of the ladder to install the wheels, and just left the top on the track there, and then kind of lifted the ladder off to the right angle that we wanted the ladder to sit at. And I found it helpful to put some blocks of wood down there just to hold that ladder in place as we were kind of marking off where the wheels would fall. So I just held the wheels in place where they go at the bottom of the ladder, and you do want them to sit vertically so they're perpendicular to the ground. I just made some marks so I knew where to drill the pilot holes. Then we pulled the ladder off again, and to install those wheels, you actually have to unscrew the wheel and take that out to get to both of the 2 screw holes for fastening in the wheel. And so you unscrew the wheel, pull that out, then you're going to drill your 2 pilot holes, fasten that wheel bracket in with screws, and then you screw the wheel back into the bracket. I will mention it might take a couple tries to do this. There's some washers that you have to kind of slide in between the wheel and the bracket that are a little annoying, but stick with it and you'll get it. And then you're pretty much done, and you have yourself a sweet new library ladder. And so if you're installing one of these yourself, there's a couple things you'll want to consider with it. The first thing is which ladder you're going to go with. And they do make ladders that are specifically designed for these library ladders. They're at the right size and the right angles and everything. So that's going to be probably your easiest route, to just buy a prefabricated ladder that's designed to go with this type of system. If you do want to just use kind of an old wooden ladder like we did, one of the things I found most helpful was to look for these extension ladders that have the round rungs on them as opposed to the flat rungs like you would find on maybe like an A-frame ladder or something like that, because I think the angles are going to be different on the A-frame ladder versus what you'll probably need. So they recommend in the instructions here that you install the ladder at a 10-degree angle from your wall, or I guess that would be 80 degrees from the ground. And a typical A-frame ladder, as I understand it, would be more like a 15-degree angle is what's considered safe for that type of ladder. So you may find with the flat rungs of an A-frame type ladder that the angles of that are going to be a little off or wonky in the end, whereas the round rungs are nice because they can go at whatever angle you end up installing it at and be perfectly fine. The next thing you'll want to consider is when you're mounting in this top track here, the brackets really need to be fastened to something that's 4 inches wide dimensionally. And so it's whether you're kind of designing your own bookshelf to mount this on or buying something, you're going to need to consider that in the design or modify something so that you have that 4-inch dimension there. And you can see like the rest of my shelves here are 1 by 2. but this one I have a 1x4 trim on the front of that, and so I had to change this one shelf where the ladder was ultimately going to mount to accommodate this top bracket. Another thing, and this is kind of minor, is when you're deciding what length of bar to get, you probably don't need it to run all the way full length of whatever you're installing it on. So like we have a 5-foot wide shelf here, and I got the 4-foot bar, and that's perfect because you don't need it to go all the way to the end because you can reach right and grab whatever you need to. Also, if your shelf does end into a wall like ours does, those wheels stick out a few inches from the ladder itself, and so you're going to want that track to stop a few inches shy of the wall so it's not going to be bashing into it anyways. And then another thing, and this probably goes without saying, but you want to fasten the shelf itself to the wall really securely and just make sure everything that you are mounting this ladder to is fastened really well. So I use these finish washers, which really gives kind of some extra grip to your screws that are fastening your bookshelf to your wall. So I used a 3-inch screw, sunk them into 3 different studs above this shelf where the bracket is actually being mounted to, so this thing is super secure. I also fastened in this front trim piece with a few screws into the shelf itself. I didn't want to rely just on nails or something like that because over time with the vibration from this ladder that would probably work itself free. So use as many screws to fasten in everything as securely as you can. So installing one of these library ladders is a really beginner friendly project, and they add a ton of character to your space, and they're just practical and fun, especially if you have kids, so that they can reach books way up top on the shelf. And so I hope that this has been helpful for you. Like I said, we'll include that link below for the exact hardware that we used if you want to check that out. So thanks so much for stopping by the farmstead today, and we'll see you next time.